Nicola Roxon, thanks for your time. The opposition has suggested that you are trying to seek political advantage from this Alan Jones affair by linking it to Tony Abbott and trying to blame him for the comments made by the radio broadcaster. How is Tony Abbott to blame?
Look, the point I'm trying to make is it's all in a context. This is not the first time Mr Jones has made inappropriate comments about the Prime Minister, and it's not the first time that Mr Abbott has been very closely linked to those comments. So the point I'm making is if you set a political environment where personal attacks at all levels are seen as appropriate, then you have actually contributed to these events coming about. The example I use is you can't strike a match and then be surprised where the fire runs off to, and I think that's exactly what Tony Abbott's done with the very aggressive and very personal attacks he's made on the Prime Minister. And he's very close to Mr Jones. He was pretty unwilling to come out and criticise him. His front benchers were at this event. They haven't been seen or heard. The point I'm making is it's all part of a pattern.
But surely a politician can't be held responsible for comments made by someone else, someone completely different, that weren't anything like what Tony Abbott had said about Julia Gillard or her father. Isn't this a bit of a stretch?
No, I don't hold Mr Abbott responsible for the comments that were made. I'm making the point about the context that they're made in, the close relationship between Mr Jones and Mr Abbott, the fact that these comments were made at a Liberal Party function, the fact that Mr Abbott's front benches were there and have not been seen or heard since, not made any comments condemning them, presumably not said anything at the time to call Mr Jones into line. And I think that Mr Abbott has to be held responsible. Remember, this is the man who spoke at a rally in front of a sign which said "ditch the witch." He's got no judgment about what's going too far and what isn't, and that's the point that I'm making. It's part of a pattern. He's not responsible for the individual words said on this occasion, but he is actually closely associated with this whole campaign of personal denigration, and I think enough is enough.
What about Alan Jones? Are you saying that his employer should sack him for this?
No, look, I'm not making that judgment one way or the other. I hope they are carefully considering his position. I'm sure that all of the advertisers are considering it. I'm sure lots of his listeners are horrified. Don't forget, ultimately, this is an argument about something inappropriate said to a daughter who is grieving for a father who's died. This is a universal moment of sadness for any child, and really I just don't understand why any political comment would be made about it, and that's why I think people have been so horrified. It's not Liberal, Labor or anything else, it's just personally inappropriate, lacking common decency, and I would have thought that most of 2GB's sponsors, let alone their executive, would be pretty embarrassed about the whole thing.
What about your own position on this? Will you be appearing on his program again?
Well, I've made clear I have appeared on his program before. I haven't got a current request in to appear on his show, and obviously I'd consider those requests when they come in. My one hesitation about saying that, I'll take the bat and ball and go home is it actually means his listeners are being punished as well for this breach of common decency. If we all don't go on his show, then no alternative view is ever put. I'm not really sure that that's to the benefit of his listeners, let alone to the benefit of the government.
Yeah, but there are programs and other media outlets that the government won't talk to because they don't agree with its political leanings. You could simply black ban the Alan Jones program if you were serious about this, couldn't you?
Well, I suppose we could, and I'm sure a discussion will be had at some point. I haven't had that discussion yet, and I'm open-minded about it. Ultimately, I want to strongly criticise these comments being made. I am frankly a bit despairing about Mr Jones. I wrote a quite detailed letter of complaint to him when he made the comments about, women always being hopeless and destroying the joint. I'm sure his women listeners, grandmothers, mothers, young women, don't need to be told that they can't, dream to do anything successful in their lives. It's clearly wrong and was clearly sexist. So this is, I think, a pattern of behaviour where I would have thought 2GB will be considering their options and what's appropriate here.
Can I ask about the government's proposed media reforms, which are still being worked on and still to be announced? Would there be any grounds in your mind for a law, a provision, a regulation that would allow for firmer action to be taken against Alan Jones in this situation?
Look, I think that if you wanted any sort of detailed response to that, speaking to Minister Conroy as the responsible minister would be the best approach. But I'm not sure that that is the answer. We're not suggesting that any law has been broken. We're not suggesting it's a crime. It is nevertheless a position of responsibility if you're a broadcaster with a lot of listeners, and common decency should be able to be shown not just to the Prime Minister but to anyone in the position of being a child, a daughter or son grieving for the loss of a parent. So I think we can make that point clearly. Whether there are some other reforms, I don't think that's really what the media reforms are looking at, but those questions would have to go to Minister Conroy.
And could I ask you just finally about another issue, the James Ashby matter? The Commonwealth has reached a settlement with him, a $50,000 payment, and yet you still claim that it was a vexatious case brought by him. How do you make that add up?
Well, look, we need to be a little bit careful here, and it's obviously difficult because we do have people going to the media at different times. The government then gets criticised when it corrects some of those facts in the media. Tomorrow, it will be reported to the court that an agreement has been reached between the Commonwealth and Mr Ashby. There are details of that agreement which no doubt then will be made public. The point that I'm making is that settlements are reached each and every day around the country that do not involve an acceptance of the fact or an admission of guilt or some such thing. I think it's inappropriate for that to be put in that context, but of course we know that this case has been run very strongly in the media. It makes it difficult for us to comply with both the obligations to the court and the obligations as the Commonwealth, but we can't be in a situation where we have both hands tied behind our backs and can't actually reject any sort of suggestion that such an admission has been made.
But surely your obligation, your first obligation, is to the courts here rather than running a political line through the media about your views on the case.
Well, I don't think that I've been running a political line. I've been responding when other material is in the media, sometimes inappropriately. I've been explaining a position that the government would take or argue in the court, and I have explained that a settlement that's been struck does not involve any admission of guilt or any acceptance of the allegations that have been made. That's a clear point. We got legal advice on this matter. We've acted in accordance with that legal advice. I think there are people who want to make all sorts of conjectures about it, but ultimately anyone that's been involved in litigation knows settlements are rarely about who is right or wrong, and more often about how you can make sure that enormous amounts of money are not spent on what has become a lawyer's picnic.
But how can you still claim it was a vexatious case if you've paid him money to stop the case?
Well, I think the answer I just gave you goes exactly to that. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth has already spent in excess of $700,000 in defending this matter. We have said to the court, and all I said was we don't resile from that and haven't made any admissions to the contrary, that we think that this is an abusive process. Now, obviously, Mr Ashby has also made allegations which he doesn't resile from. A settlement means you agree to disagree. This is the agreement that's been struck. It will be reported to the court tomorrow, and other matters will be argued before the court tomorrow. And really, I think it's difficult for me to be able to go into more detail than that in order to show the courtesy to the court that is required.
I take your point that you want to limit the amount of money being spent on lawyers in all of this, but in maintaining the position that this is vexatious, James Ashby is now threatening defamation against you. This could drag it out further in the courts.
Well, I think that that's a ridiculous threat to be made, but this is a situation which has already been extremely litigious. The amount of money spent is massively in excess of any amount that would have been ordered, even if all of the facts were proved to be true and if it had gone appropriately through the Human Rights Commission, as you would normally, bring a matter like this. So I think it's fair enough. The cost is one important consideration, but there are others. We've taken that advice. We've struck a settlement with Mr Ashby, and that'll be reported to the court tomorrow, and other matters will then be discussed and argued before the court tomorrow.
All right. Attorney General Nicola Roxon, thank you.
It's a pleasure.